All right, so today we're going to be going over medical incident command. Should be a rather interesting and different look at it if you've never been inside of the incident command system. We will be going over ICS, some general principles, but we're going to try and focus more on the medical side, particularly the medical incident command portion of it, while still incorporating some of the other parts. So the command function, the ICS system, developed in the 1970s, following a series of catastrophic fires in California, resulting in millions of property damage and a large loss of life. And in 2004, ICS was included as part of the National Incident Command Management System. Big thing with this, guys, is you want to see the people who are the very best at ICS. Typically, it's wildland fire guys. The fire department itself uses ICS quite a lot, but they use all different parts. The ICS system in general is very scalable. It's able to scale from small incidents, one engine in a rescue or one engine in an ambulance, or even just one single engine, all the way up to thousands and thousands of firefighters on a giant line and our fire, along with a number of other incidents. And we'll talk about some of the logistics side, some of these other things that we'll look at trying to go over. It's meant to be scalable. Many other of our allied nations, such as Australia, uses this same system, particularly the NEM side, and it's meant to be used across the nation. So the feds can come in and take a certain part of this, and they'll fit it in. It all goes through FEMA, and it's all a national type system that the entire nation basically fits in. If you don't have a ton of experience with the incident command system, unfortunately, the private ambulances within the Las Vegas system aren't on the radio, so they don't always get to hear necessarily a lot of the ICS portion going on, even though they are a part of it, particularly in accidents and other larger incidents. They're, as kind of mentioning, they're not used every single incident, but many times, anytime there's any more than one or two units, if it's a standard medical call with an engine and a rescue, they usually don't. However, if it's a accident, maybe an engine and rescue, depending on the department SOPs for each specific department, they will start activating. In Arizona, we use this quite a lot. We'd hear the fire department get on scene, even for a single car rollover, one patient, they'd still activate the ICS just to develop these skills and to continue that. Also, you never know if all of a sudden you're going to have a multi-patient incident where they're going to need more resources than that are currently there. And it's just meant to pretty much scale up all the way to where you have logistics, supply, you have all these other things. For our standard in the city, 1 to 2, 3 maybe car accident, none of this is necessarily needed, but as it scales up, it's very, very useful. When you look at any type of big incidents, to include hurricanes, once again, wildland fires, 9/11 is where some of this was modified from just the original ICS. Afterwards, they modified a bit, moved it over to the NIM side. And then October 1st, a lot of it was used. It's supposed to add a little bit of structure that everyone should be able to fill in no matter what agency you work for and kind of figure out what spot you're in. And because it's a national framework that everyone should be following, it's easy for an AMR ambulance to show up next to a community ambulance. They can both fall under the medical command. While under incident, they might have a medical supervisor. It could be a fire EMS 1, county's equivalent, Henderson's equivalent, supervisor from Medic West, anything like that, and they would be able to fit into the system, which is fine. And then underneath that medical incident would be the ICS command. And so you can just see it will go over some of the framework of it and how it basically applies there. As saying here, we're looking at it overall, you can see many of these different sections can be used or not used as needed. When we first start at the very top of it, standard incident command. This is just a general overall view of a large scale incident and how each of these spots fills in. There's a ton of free classes that you can take via the FEMA and some of the, I will have links to that in the resources, but look at, you can get advanced certs, and if you have the right certifications, many times you can get deployed, sometimes even as a single resource, kind of cool, to different areas, or if you're part of a larger department, many times they send sections out, and as you become more and more experienced within the fire incident system, or the ICS system, you can get sent out to certain fires, or otherwise. Our chiefs out in Arizona, many times, because they've been on so many wildland fires, they became very, very proficient within the ICS system, how to fight wildland fires. they would keep moving up the system. And so it really allows even structure fire guys to work with wildland fire guys, pure wildland fire guys, interface departments, EMS everywhere. It's a pretty interesting system when used. So when we look at this, a more filled out, and these can get even more as it trickles down. It can subdivide even further, but this is a general ICS layout. You have your incident commander, you have your public information commander, and your liaison officer, your safety officer. As you notice, all three of these are outside of the other individuals that are considered part of the command staff, as are the operations chief, planning chief, logistics chief, and finance and admin section chiefs. And depending on what they're in charge of, sometimes they go by different names. All this is just different parts of ICS. When you get more into it, you learn many of the different types of positions and the sub-positions, and then they have those specialty certifications that you can get via logistics, planning, finance, admin. And so we'll continue on kind of down, as we said, operations section. This is where we belong in 99% of the time. When you look at this, you have branches, operate, and things like air ops. Air ops will separate into its own, but it's part of operations, and sometimes it can, some of these sections cannot always be used just right up at the top, but also that air ops, particularly on, like, say, a highway accident in the middle of, on the way to Moapa, you might not need all the crazy branches. You might just have an engine or two or a couple rescues, but you might have flight, and so that air ops can kind of move down further. When you break down the branches, they divide into divisions and groups. Divisions are typically separated by location. Groups are separated by specialty, and it can be, you can have both in one or you can have one. So like all medical would be medical group. Divisions would be east side of the incident division, whatever they call that. Sometimes it'll be by the local road name. Other times it could be side of the building, depending if it's a big structure fire. They might go A side of a building, B side of a building, D side of a building, E, whichever way, if it has 5 sides. The size of the building, it's not really applicable to us. On the fire side, they do use that. For us, not as much. When we start breaking down into some of these separate ones, strike teams are all resources of a single type. So October 1st, they sent a strike team of ambulances. They're all the same type or close of. They could be of different agencies, all this, but they're all ambulances, or they're all fire engines or whatever else. Sometimes there could be a little bit of leeway of like sending in a rescue or a squad with the medical, but you're there to more or less be very similar to the same type, versus a task force, which is a group of different types of units that are then going to they're assigned a task, and they're going to be going after a certain thing. A task force could be going an engine, a rescue, and ambulance going to a single car rollover, and that would be the task force if there was an extra car rollover and a big incident, and that might be multiple different types of units all being tasked to a certain objective. Groups tend to be kind of like say the same. And single resources are very interesting. Single resources can encompass a number of different factors. On a wildland fire, it can be a single resource dozer, going ahead making huge giant lines as a big old bulldozer. It can be a single resource medic, which is a lot of what our medics did. The fire department I worked at, they would get tasked out. They would take we had a medical bag, medications, monitor, a few other things that they would go with them, and they would be given an SUV, and they'd be tasked out to some of these wildland fires, and they'd act as a paramedic resource, single resource there. Single resources are a little bit, sometimes they can be very odd, sometimes they can just fit into a whole thing. And you have to be certified as a single resource one. It's not that hard. For like wildland fires, there's just different locations. So this is where the majority of where we operate within is the medical group. And as you hear medical group, that can then be separated into, we look at medical group, rescue group, extrication group, fire suppression group. There's a whole number of groups that can be assigned with, and this can include law enforcement, EMS, fire, all types of different utilities, a number of different things, and they can be separated into groups based off of a job to do versus divisions at location, and really that can kind of separate into both. So that's where you're going to see medical group, and you'll see medical group commander or medical group chief, kind of however it's dictated. We'll see here in a few. Planning section isn't really where we see very much unless you get higher up. Many times the planning section is used depending on the incident going on in the planning section in a big wildland fire is used constantly. It's also used prior to incidents, particularly when we look at like New Year's Eve and they're planning this scheduled mass casualty possible event or MCI type event, and a lot of planning goes in prior, and many times there's some on the after side where they look at the things that they debrief, and they work a lot with the incident commander to come up with good plans. There's a few things in their demobilization unit. Those guys help, particularly once again, on the big wildland fires is where this is used a lot. Also, you see it in hurricanes, things like that, where they had all these resources added, and now they start to demobilize them and send them back to their home stations, their home states, wherever else they're going to. Some of the other ones, documentation unit, they're keeping track of all the things. Not quite. Some of these are not used as much. Some are used as more. I'm not an ICS expert when you get into some of these really sub branches that you only see in certain incidents, but in general, some of these you'll see more, and some of them you'll see a little bit less. Logistics section, lights. This is where sometimes the fire department can be used, or will use a logistics section for a standard structure fire that they might not normally use. You kind of have two. You have your support and service branches, then it separates out further. On the service side, you got the communication unit, really helping build communication. Particularly in wildland fires, we're in the middle of nowhere and you don't have set up radios, and being able to work with the logistics side of communications. Not necessarily they're actually sending out messages themselves. Most of that's coming from planning's operations or the incident command staff itself, the high up side. But what they're doing is setting up the communication infrastructure needed to use radios out in the middle of nowhere where there might not be towers, or the towers might have been burnt in the forest fire that are on top of those hills, and now they're not there, so they need to set up ad hoc type radios to be able to keep everyone that's on the incident in communication. They might need to issue 80 radios. There's a whole bunch of different stockpiles that they can kind of work with. The medical unit, this medical unit is not the standard medical unit that we're talking about for a operation side where you are assigned to a medical group. That portion's a little bit different. This is more of like the medical unit that would be used in the sense of on a huge fire, it might be a little bit of that single resource, but you're going there as a paramedic and you're kind of setting up a tent, almost like we do for EDC, things like that. That's a little bit more where the medical side is, even though operations EDC is its own thing in there. But you're setting up a tent to support medical issues that happen within the incident to our own staff most of the time, and it just much like a sick hall or anything like that. It's more set up to support that staff because it could be kind of a clinic tent for if you're out there on a wildland fire, you fall down, break a leg. They'll probably send you back to the medical unit to get stabilized and then transport you out from there. So you're not responding to the incident as a operational piece, part of the medical part. It's more the side of supporting the incident going on and providing medical support that way. It's a little bit semantics, but that's a little bit different. Food, so you're not necessarily worried about food on a 2-car crash, but when you talk about these big incidents, getting MREs out there, setting up mess hall tents. MREs get really old after a day or two or 3. However, when you're there for multi-weeks, a couple months, some of these giant fires you need to support all the units out there and get the food there. Support branch, the supply units, getting all the supplies that they need. There's a ton of stockpiles throughout the United States with different resources, whether we're talking about stockpiles of ambulances such as AMR has that is contracted through their national big scope in contracts with the feds and to other places to different types of meds for big hazmat issues and antidotes there. There's a ton of different supplies all around. Some of them are built in, some of them are local, some of them are states and regional, and some are federal. There's a number of different supplies that they can kind of work with. But they're working there, making sure people have the equipment that they need to deal with that incident. Facilities is big into lights, and this is where you might see a facility on a structure fire because they have their air and light units where they're bringing in, they need to refill their SCBAs, provide lighting, and this is also in one of those ones where the medical unit might be there and they're dealing with the rehab side of things. They're checking on the firefighters that come outside the fire, make sure that they're healthy. They're not going to go back in and have some type of incident while they're inside trying to fight a fire because they didn't get a chance to rehab. And ground support, just supporting some more. Finance, admin, obviously we're not seeing this necessarily on our normal calls. Usually you can. Sometimes it's the back end and it's just kind of built into local structure fire incidents. Some of it is when we talk about these bigger incidents, so the fires, the hurricanes, all these giant crazy incidents. This is where they keep track of things that happen, of both the amount of time that a unit that is being called up to go help fire. Like I said, we would send single resource units, engines, water tenders, big old water tanks, the truck hauling, a number of different resources that they can send out. The federal agencies or the state agencies will then compensate the fire department that sends that unit as well as a backfill at station. I think City does this as well with when they send out their rescue team to go help places like recently out in Hawaii where they have these big incidents that happen and they need different specialty teams to go out there. The department that sends their special team out gets compensated for the people that they send as well as the backfill of that. And so compensation helps there. They are the cost unit. The compensation claims unit is good for trying to track all the individual houses that get damaged, individual property, livestock that's lost, things like that. Times keeping track of everyone, making sure they're most wildland fire incidents don't go. The units are not allowed. They need to be demobilized after 21 days. Sometimes it's only 14. They can be extended up to 21. They have to go back. They might only go back for a couple days, but then before getting sent to the next incident, and then they're back on the clock for another one. So they need a little bit of rehab time before that, and unit helps track that. So we're going to continue on with some of this. Command function. Command must be established immediately, anytime. So being on a radio, if you've been at a department that works, if you're private ambulance, but you were in many areas throughout the United States, they're on the same comms as the fire department. Here, we do almost everything through MDT. The fire department still is on comms with FAO, and many times that what we don't see on the private side, but you will see on the fire side, is on any type of incident where they decide that an incident command needs to be established. It's established immediately. It'll be something like, hey, this is engine 60 we are on scene of a single car rollover. I'll establish IC command at Blue Diamond, and this will be Blue Diamond IC, depending on how kind of the wording and the structure is. It's been a long time since I've had to set up any type of command, but this is kind of a quick breakdown of this and the important parts of the command function. So put it simply, management leads it, operation does it, planning tells it, logistic gets it, finance pays it. Short and simple. Command function. First thing they're going to do when they get there, they're going to perform a scene size up. They're going to do their walk around. In many places, and I've set up command many times like this on ground ambulance out in Arizona, even as the first ambulance on scene and you notice that you're going to need additional resources, we'd set up the IC command system. And I would do my 360 walk around. I'd have my partner start looking at patients, seeing what we had overall, maybe getting equipment set up, and then we'd start, or possibly starting triage depending on the number of patients. We'd set up IC command, and then if we were the first on and the engine was en route, as soon as the engine got there, I would pass over command to usually the captain coming in. Sometimes a BC would be coming over, and they would take command, and I could either give it directly to the chief or to the captain, see how whatever is needed, depending on the situation. Once again, scaling up, and they will continue to call higher and higher chiefs and other operations personnel as an incident gets more complex, usually you need that higher level, more qualified IC. However, they need any type of IC initially, and a captain might be running the whole thing for quite some time if a BC is not available or if they're taking a little bit longer to get there. When you get to a certain size, the more white helmets you get there, they start running things more higher up the chain. Some important things, particularly when they're taking up IC, as far as if you're a single resource on scene first of a multi-casualty incident and you need to start somehow, you're going to be starting IC, but you're also going to start triage. You're not going to just sit back and let your EMT partner go ahead and triage and start treating the patients. No, you're going to take IC and you're going to start doing things. When they're talking about setting up an effective command mode and position, many times, depending, it's somewhat agency specific, but many times they'll throw a green light on top of the rescue engine and or BC rig truck, whatever they have there, and that will be designated as the IC vehicle and where the IC should be located. Many BCs have a driver. Many times it's a captain that's assigned there. Sometimes, depending on the department, sometimes it's a good job for someone looking to move up because they're learning the BC position. Other times it's a bit more of a punitive position because they can't work on the line for whatever reason and they get stuck driving the BC around. But many times, so you have a captain and a BC or whatever department happens there, and they're running they will run the entire call from the front of their truck or from the hood of their truck. They'll start laying out maps. They'll try figuring things out, and they just need a position where they can see everything, but they're also out of the hot zone. But some things that we're going to do initially, we're going to set up our initial brief report by radio, including key points, size up, and identifying the location of the IAP. So further, our instant command post. What that also tells for everyone else on the radio channel responding to this incident, it will be, hey, we are going to be medic 562. We will be first ambulance at the intersection here. So when other units show up, they know who to report into the IC. And as soon as typically someone who's a little bit more qualified, depending on whatever side of leading larger incidents, you'll do a handoff, and then it'll be passed over the radio that so-and-so has IC, and if it needs to be positioned or moved, they'll do that. And if you were initially that IC, you might be moved to medical group commander, you might be moved to transport group lead, or just, hey, start triaging patients, let me know. And it'll expand or track as needed. Try and get a rough idea of what initial resources, if anything, start adding more resources than you think you might need, because it's easier to cancel one than trying to get more units later. We're leaving our patients on scene longer than they need to be, and having more units en route and then canceled is a whole lot easier to do than call them up later when it's too late. All right, so now we're also going to talk about unified command. So command may take a single or unified form, depending on how many incidents are and how many resources are involved, as well as kind of the overall issues that are kind of happening with the scene. For example, with a law enforcement type, a active shooter, you're going to need a unified command, because you need the police incident commander running the police side of things. The fire incident commander is usually running much of the it can be particularly in our area, they'll be helping and or running the EMS side, or there might be rescue things that need to be done too. And you can also see with just a rescue and a fire or EMS side, if it's semi-local, you're going to have two people that are kind of making those decisions overall in that unified command structure. A fire captain shouldn't be telling a police officer how to deploy his men, and vice versa, and women. You should, and then public health, depending, especially on big incidents. October 1st, eventually someone got there. You get the hospitals, you get a whole bunch of higher level people involved, city managers, depending on different things. You start looking down, then you have the command staff that helps support all that, including like the public information command or officer. The safety officer is set outside. It's not seen right here because it's part of the command staff. It's set outside of the normal chain of command, because at any time that safety officer can go, hey, this is unsafe, we need to pull back. Much like many things we do, we start getting tunnel vision and seeing an objective and not recognizing safety hazards around us. The idea is for all of us to go home, right? So that's where the safety command is a little bit outside of the normal command. And then you see it's still kind of broken down in the same sections. So its decision to expand or contract ICS organization on 3 major incident priorities. Life safety. Anytime there's life safety, big issue. Incident stability. Is it incident safe? And stability can be, is there an active shooter still, or is this building about ready to collapse, right? And then property conservation. Property conservation is always somewhat a little bit down. It's still important, but it's not as important as life safety. And incident stability is something that we have to worry about as first responders, right? As we're responding up to that, we need to make sure that we are staying safe, and that if the incident's getting bigger or worse, we're not caught up in the whole, we're not becoming part of the problem either. It happens at times. All right, so section responsibility. Section chiefs should not become involved in the physical task. Much like you as a lead medic of a code, you should not be getting in there unless you absolutely need to just touch and back out. You should not be part of the actual operations. On smaller incidents, though, it kind of does happen. When getting these bigger incidents, you have a command responsibility and not an action responsibility. Section chiefs responsibilities include accomplishing objectives set by command, monitoring work progress and personal welfare, redirecting activities necessary, requesting additional resources needed, providing command with frequent reports. You're going to see here, command staff, liaison officer, liaison between different agencies. If it's not a huge incident, but we do have police on scene, say securing the road, shutting down the road, they don't necessarily need their own command, but the liaison officer would most likely be, if it's from the fire side, if the fire had overall incident command, the liaison officer would be linking up with the police, making sure that we need is also that, hey, the road's shut down, or hey, we're going to have a helicopter landing soon. They're coming in. Can you make sure the road shut down, that police, that people aren't coming over here? Hey, we're having an incident, we need here. So they link up with that. You don't need it in that sense quite as much as the unified command, but it's still used. PIC is, or PIO, I'm sorry, not PIC, that's pilot in command. Public Information Officer, PIO, is the person who's talking to the media in front of these big incidents. Sometimes it's someone really, really high up, but they're a little bit separate outside, and they're good at public speaking. And then the general staff, once again, Operations Section Chief, Planning Section Chief, Logistics Section Chief, Finance Administration Section Chief, Intelligence Investigation Section Chief, which is more on the police side than our side, or the feds. Responsibility Finance Administration Section, important for tracking costs and the way reimbursements handled. Logistics, responsible for providing supplies, equipment, including personnel to operate the equipment, facilities, food, service, communications, lights, and air, things like that. Operation directs all and coordinates all emergency operations and ensures safety of all personnel. Planning section helps provide past, present, and future information. So, like I said, sometimes it's pre-planning for the big incidents like New Year's Eve, EDC, things like that. Present, this is the section in there that's really helping the IC come up with a good plan. We don't see it quite as often in a typical motor vehicle accident type IC incident. However, when you get in those really big ones, they're instrumental, and they're rather big sections when they're talking about how they're going to deal with this 100,000 acre fire, and they have 1,000 firefighters and other types of units out there. All of a sudden, you need a lot of planning and coordination going in there. And so that's where planning really starts doing. And then, like I also say in future, debriefing, looking at what we did right, wrong, and how we're going to try and fix that for the future. Declaring a major incident, preparing for a major incident should be clear from the following situation: more than 2 ambulances required for adequate treatment, hazard or radioactive materials, chemicals in a significant quantity, hazmat situations. MCI, a large number of patients require special EMS resources such as helicopters, rescue teams, several rescue or extrication units. If you got to get the heavy rescue out there, and it needs to be out there, this is now sometimes considered an MCI. If it's only one patient, maybe, but still, it's going to need the IC system. The major incidents are where big things happen. Obviously, the most obvious in our recent past would be October 1st. That is a major incident. The fires are considered major incidents, and they have different escalations and different types of IC teams that will come and take over, particularly when we come talk about the wildfire. You have a type 1 team, a type 2 team, type 3s, and they all are rated to deal with certain situations. When you have a wildland fire, it might be only 10,000 acres, and as a random number, this is not a for sure or the actual number they use, but after 15,000 acres, now they're calling in the type 2 team. However, all of a sudden a type 1 team might be present if it could be only 1,000 acre fire, but if it's threatening like a small community, all of a sudden now they have a bunch of life threats and they need a lot more resources, a lot more quicker, and so they're going to need a higher level IC team. Sometimes they'll jump it up to a 1. It happens up in Flagstaff area quite a lot. A few summers back, it happened multiple times, and so all of a sudden you'll see, while the fire itself might not be that big, also rate of growth, things like that will all of a sudden kick in to get the higher level IC teams in there, and they're just more experienced and they're used to dealing with larger incidents. Pre-planning, this is kind of what we talked about. New Year's Eve, scene management, dealing with the incident there, and then post-disaster. This is on that planning side I was kind of talking about earlier. Scene assessment, ICS MCI is kind of a number of casualties, nature of event, overwhelms available resources. They call it an MCI, and we start getting more and more units there. If you need to, once again, overestimate the amount of units you need, and if we need to cancel them, cool. It's a whole lot easier to cancel units than it is to try and call them and they're not available. Command must immediately establish radio contract with the main communication center in Las Vegas local area, FAO, and emergency operations center. When you talk about these big ones, then you start getting into the emergency operations centers. You get the mobile operations centers. When you talk about New Year's Eve, they have multiple separate ones. You got the feds very, very involved in these very big incidents. October 1st, you have the local FBI, and you have everyone showing up. They have people jumping on planes for these major incidents like October 1st from DC in the moment, and they're coming over, and they have the local FBI agencies jumping in and helping. Many times it's just an assist, having the ability to do that. Obtaining resources, staging techniques that can be used to deploy resources effectively include the following: lining up vehicles at the scene to facilitate egress and staging away from a limited access how I identify informal staging area with an assigned staging officer. So a lot of what this is really talking about, guys. Once again, using October 1st as a relatively is one that we ended up staging a bunch of units all around, ready to move to the scene. If the scene's unsafe, we're not going to put a ton of ambulances there. The idea of a staging, it happens a lot on the medical side with the ambulances. They're going to go, cool, we're going to stage all you guys, and we're going to go ahead and send in a couple ambulances at a time, grab your patient, leave. It even happens with air. Sometimes the staging is in orbit, and they land they'll have a couple helicopters on the ground at a time. They'll load the patients, take off, and go. And we've done that quite a few times on the flight side. With fireside, sometimes when you first show up to a big well on fire, you're going to go ahead and stage your engine type 2, type 3, type 6, whatever else you have there, you'd stage it, water tenders, whatever else, and then as it's needed, they're going to move you as a resource, your engine and your crew, out to wherever it's needed, but they need everything kind of there. The bigger incidents need a staging officer to help coordinate that and communicate with the IC. So MCIs, group or different functions. So a group does things, a division is a location. Extrication rescue group is an example. Determine whether some other things we can say, so like rescue groups, things that they can do, determine whether triage and the primary triage reportment, attaching tagging assignments, and then some of this is a little bit odd because some of this should be definitely in the medical side, and we'll get into particularly the medical. And so this is as extrication or rescues going on, they're communicating, hey, we have these many patients, we're going to go ahead and start some of this. Some of those people might be assigned, hey, you're going to be triaged within this rescue group to triage the patients that are still trapped in here, as example, this bus on top of a car, and they're going to get in there, triage the patients that are in there, let medical group know what's going on, and start some of that triage process. So now the part that's more applicable to us as standard or as a general paramedic group, not getting too deep into the fireside, right? Like there's very, very deep courses that go into all these individual ones and individual certifications. We're not going to get too deep into that right now with us in general, but we talk about EMS branch. It can be separated into branches and or groups. It could be medical group, which is that smaller subdivision, or it can be EMS branch if it's a large one. You can also separate into divisions based off, it can be part of medical group or medical branch, or sorry, EMS branch, then separated into like east side of incident division, west side, however different ways, because then it can be subdivided down into groups and or divisions. Groups, though, once again, are after jobs. So these are kind of subgroups. So we have triage, things to do as the functions of the triage and treatment group. We'll kind of go over all these. Triage and tag all patients who are close to extrication. Supervisor ensure movement of all patients to treatment area. Ensure adequate personnel to accomplish tasks. Ensure safety of all members. Communicate with the EMS branch on progress of operations. Establish initial morgue if necessary. And document activities of the triage areas. Sometimes triage gets over kind of fast, and then those resources, if they finish triage, they can somewhat move to re-triage and or move to the treatment and or transport branches. You have a bunch of EMTs, you have them go ahead and help the triage. Many times triage can be done by basics and AEMTs and leave the treatment to the medics. And then they might assist with that, or they might go, cool, you as a unit is done. Typically, you might have a little bit of separation within a small group of, I'm going to have my partner go do triage while I'm working on trying to treat this patient. He'll come back, I triage the patients. We have 2 greens, 1 yellow, 1 red, 1 black. And after that, you then go, all right, let's try and get some of these patients over here. I'm going to just go ahead and start some of these initial treatments. And then you can help me on the treatment side. You shouldn't be separating your resources like an ambulance or a rescue too much more than something on a smaller incident. On the bigger incidents, you guys should be a team, some more or less, because if you need to move to transportation branch, you need to be able to have someone drive your ambulance, and your partner is going to be that person, right? You're going to be in the back treating your patient. Treatment side, separate patients by each priority category. They have big old tarps that you can lay these patients on and start different treatments. You can ensure they have a number of different ways to separate. Sometimes it's just like, here, we're going to have one rather easy way is you go, hey, everyone who is able to walk, please walk towards me, follow my voice. Cool, you guys are all green. You're going to go ahead and move over to this bus. Sometimes we can get those guys still out of there quickly, particularly when AMR brings their big transport bus that they have staged wherever else. Many times places we use school buses or anything else where they can transport a large number of patients, basically walking wounded, to an area. And we'll get a little bit more into that when we talk about triage here in a few. But then you start triaging find your yellows, your reds, and then you don't. The one last thing is you typically don't want the patients that are tagged black, aka dead or dying. That there's nothing much we can do about it without tying up more resources in total, and we'll get into that a little bit further when we get into the triage. And so you want the morgue separated a little bit from the rest. And triage and treatment is taking care of some of that. Sometimes the treatment area can move depending on the ongoing situation. So ensure all safety of all members in the working area, ensure sufficient supplies and personnel, maintain security of treatment area, and decon help. We shouldn't be doing the actual full-on decon, but we can be doing some of the decon. You're doing some rough documentation of what you are doing as it allows. If we look back October 1st, many people had some difficulties dealing with trying to keep track of how many patients were treated where, and when you have 4 or 5 shot patients in the back of your ambulance, it's really hard to do a traditional chart and get back in action. So if they have any type of documentation they can work with, whether it's a triage tags, which many times have some built-in documentation and tracking, use those. And then they're also providing updates to the EMS branch director. You kind of have to see if it's 4 people in an accident, many times you're going to do normal charting, but when you're dealing with 10, 20, 30, hundreds of people, all of a sudden charting becomes difficult. But they do have some of that triage tag stuff, and we'll go over here in a few. Transportation, direct all movement of patients, ensure safety of members. Sometimes transportation is helping triage move. Triage patients, it could be some people from the rescue group coming over and as they're pulling people out of the cars, it's kind of getting moved to triage and transport, depending on some of that situation. And they can be moving patients from the scene to the treatment area or from treatment area to the hospital. It can act a little bit somewhat in there in the middle, kind of depending on what part of the incident you're at. They work with the treatment supervisor on patient movement to hospitals. They should be telling the EMS branch leader and or depending on the size of the incident, maybe just the IC, hey, we are transporting 2 yellows to Sunrise. Many of the tags have a barcode on that you can scan, go into Sunrise, or you leave a tag, hey, we're taking this patient to Sunrise, and it helps tracking and keeping track of where people and bodies went depending on the situation. Request additional transport units from ES branch or staging supervisor. So if all of a sudden you're out of transport units, but you have a bunch more patients that that are ready to be transported, maybe they will demobilize some of the triage, or move people from the triage team to transportation. Maybe they have a bunch in staging and you just need more ambulances from staging, or maybe they need to request more units overall. And so they're kind of documenting that, and it is rather important to make sure that we are tracking where all these patients are going. If they're going from one place to somewhere else, we need to try our absolute best. There's situations within like October 1st, where it becomes very difficult to track some of those, but do our best to keep track of those. On the smaller ones, we absolutely have to keep on top of that. And any of us can be put into any of these branches within the EMS branch. They try to put soups there as they can, at least the AMR side, because of both regulations overall, as well as AMR's ability and contracts with the feds. Most of their operations soups have more advanced ICS certs to be able to work in some of these officially bigger teams at certain levels, and particularly as the incident ICS system is more structured and formalized in the bigger incidents, where they're able to put people with a proper certification or experience into those positions. But like I said in the beginning, you're IC and you might have very little to no ICS experience. So that being said, not a big deal. We need to be able to fit all within, particularly in the EMS branch. We're not expecting you to go do the rescue branch or go do fire suppression branch unless you're part of the fire department. Separate thing. You guys are the people that are part of the fire department, already have more advanced training in some of the ICS, and they typically have a couple extra certs. FlySide, I had some too, particularly as a base manager, and the ability to kind of step into some of these extra roles. Roles of sometimes we see physicians on scene. Roles of physician may include performing triage, performing emergency surgery, facilitate extrication, performing specialized invasive procedures on scene, obtain more detailed patient assessment. If they are a random doctor, you might want to, if they seem sober and they are willing to help in a very chaotic situation, absolutely enlist their help just let them know that they're going to have to stick around and help some of the documentation afterwards to say, hey, you did a finger thoracotomy on this patient and then you disappeared. I have to now explain why there's a hole, while appropriate, in this patient's chest, hopefully. Now, but if you have that doctor that if they're doing something like that, they should be able to step up into that role and stay there. Sometimes you get docs, depending on where you're at, that have that specialty that are actually assigned to head out. Either they could be part of the hospital command system or as part of the overall emergent situation. So if it happens, they will move to a position where they're actually able to help and help coordinate certain activities. Dr. Barnum has a number of those. I think Dr. Davidson does as well. And many of the medical directors or doctors with EMS fellowships tend to get, if they have an interest in EMS and they have that background, things like Dr. Katz working on, if you guys remember her, she, when they get these EMS, some of these, they tend to be more involved out in the field and getting out of the hospital possibly more. If you see any of those ones there, particularly if they got a badge that says medical director and like that, they're usually pretty safe to allow in your treatment area and to have them help out and help coordinate things. All right, treatment groups. Like I said, disposition of the deceased, move them to the morgue, move them away from the living. You don't want people freaking out because they see their loved one dead next to them and they're yelling at you to help them. Even if they might have some agonal breathing or pulses, they seem like they could be savable. Biggest thing about triage is doing the most good for the most amount of people. Yes, we can run a code, but if we do that, we're not able to help all the people that we would normally be able to help, particularly in a trauma type situation. We know trauma codes very low survival rates, right? So move those patients outside. Many times on these big incidents, you're going to work with a medical examiner, coroner, or law enforcement personnel. Many times, like October 1st, you're dealing with the federal as well as coroners because they're working on both. They're starting an investigation, not almost at the back end of this incident or possibly during this incident. They're starting to at least gather evidence and doing that. So you want to work with whatever law enforcement agencies there. Many times the secure area for morgue, making sure there's people with low morals that could want to take advantage and like, oh, that person has very nice watch. Not that we're too worried about things like that, but we want to make sure that it's all secured and that people aren't messing with bodies or just interfering with bodies that don't need to be, because it's now part of a investigation. Usually any type of fatal, even accident, we know the police want to have us try and have a minimal impact on the scene. Transportation group communicates with receiving medical facilities, ambulances, air medical services for patient transport. Just working on getting patients out of there, whether it's by ambulance, air ambulance, some of those big buses, and sometimes like, hey, we have a large number of walking wounded. Can we get the AMR bus out here to transport all these patients to a certain hospital, probably one of the hospitals that's not a trauma center, that's a little bit further out, or maybe a level 3 trauma center or wherever else, to get these patients out there where they can deal with some of these larger numbers. San Martin, Southern Hills, for example, in Vegas, Spring Valley, if it's way on the east side, something like that, so that they can try and get these patients to a large amount of patients to different places. So that's how that goes. Staging area responsible, staging area manager. This is a not great picture, but you can see a number of ambulances all staged, ready to be sent into an incident. They're coordinating with law enforcement personnel to block streets, intersections, and allow establishment of a staging area. I know we had at least one, probably a couple on October 1st, and hopefully Mr. Gannon, who was he was a supervisor during October 1st, and he had a little bit of a different insight, as well as his brother, who's also a supervisor, as they were on scene during October 1st, helping deal with some of this stuff. So they have a little bit of interesting insight on that, and we'll see if I can get at least Mr. Gannon here to come help talk about some of the issues that went on. They're updating the command staff with resources that need to be maintained in staging. Sometimes as an incident continues to escalate or starts to de-escalate, they might start releasing units to still go run normal calls throughout the city. While many people decide, I'm not going to call right now as there's a shooting going on the strip, people still have heart attacks, they still have all these issues, and they still need to be, and there's still emergency calls out there. So the staging area manager needs to make sure that, hey, are we still needing these on standby? They kind of have their own thing. It's a little bit higher level than necessarily we're worried about for a medical group, but something to be aware of. And they need to be visible and keeping track of the units coming and go, or from there. Rehab area, this is hazmat rehab. You typically have whatever medic. I believe most city maintains their own rehab unit for dealing with some of these patients. When we get into hazmat, we'll talk about the importance of some of this and how you can help decon, or not help decon, but make sure that if you do get a responder that has an issue and that he's deconned prior, why some of these suits matter, what the difference is between some of these suits, and we'll get into that a little bit more in hazmat. But particularly with fire or hazmat type incidents where you're wearing a ton of gear, once their air tanks and the SCBAs run out, they typically come back. That is a good point for them to rehab. They will sit there, they'll have their vitals taken, they'll drink some water, they'll rehydrate before they get sent back in. So if all of a sudden they're there with 160 beats per minute, their heart's just going after, they're going to make sure the rehab unit will get them basically rehabbed prior to be able to send them back into the zone. A ton of incidents around here. We can ask some of the fire guys and seeing what Las Vegas fire and rescue specific kind of how rehab goes. But for this, just a quick overview. Every department does things a little bit different, and this also sometimes comes when we look at the logistics section. Part of this might be the medical unit over to the side that's not part of the operations dealing with the actual fire or the incident going on, but they're there to support the staff, as well as dealing with lights, air. They need their SCBAs refilled, so they'll have a truck that is able to refill their air via cascade systems and or air compressors, different things like that. They have entire units that are dedicated to that, and that's all part of logistics side and the rehab side. So the support branch to break down again. So we have facilities unit, communications unit, support branch. You have your order and supply unit, external support branch. You start getting, so you see some of these areas that really temporary housing unit, support unit. What is that? And that's really talking like tent structures for big wildland fires, things like that. We typically won't see that on a couple car accident within a city. But you just see how many of these they can keep subdividing out and expand as necessary. And after each major incident, sometimes there's some updates to ICS after they do a debrief and they find out things that did well and did not. Things like wildfires, they still update all the time, but it doesn't change a ton because they're typically dealing with the same type of incident. And these guys are doing ICS command level stuff throughout the entire fire season, depending on what it is. It runs like 6 to 9 plus months of the year. Certain parts of the country burn at different times due to weather and weather, elevation, latitude, things like that. And so some other things they did, we talked about this in the past. Sometimes you will see, it seems a little bit silly, but when we went and trained different units at the flight as a base manager on the outreach education side, we actually had our students wear these, like some of the local fire departments and otherwise. But you'll see these on some scenes, and it does help identify certain people. It seems somewhat silly, but it also kind of tracks and allows you to see what type of people. You can see some of what this is. Seems to be operations all red. You might see different versions. You might never see this again in your life, or you might see this depending on what you're kind of doing and where you're at, right? And each one has kind of a separate color scheme, everything that. Don't worry about tests on this. Nothing should be on here as far as I know, but this is an example that can be used. Big thing in some of these incidents, and it did bring up something communication, and it's probably getting in here to more. Communications are huge on this. If you have a radio channel that you're assigned to, particularly a TAC channel, the fire department has a ton of sub-TAC channels. TAC channels are what we consider line of sight. When we talk about line of sight, the radios do not have a repeater. It doesn't go up to Sunrise Mountain, bounce off, and come back. What it does is if you can see the person, you can go there. And so these TAC channels, so you're not, as an engine company, rescue, or some of these subdivision ICS groups, it might be assigned, hey, medical group's going to be on TAC 3, or whatever channels there. Just that's part of the communication side. And then you can communicate as needed there. Otherwise, you could have however many hundreds of people, or even just tens and 20s of people, but they're all trying to talk on the radio at the same time. We are very poor at talking on the radio at the same time. That being said, everyone is in a very chaotic situation, and this is where communication really can become a big breaking point. This is after 9/11. This is one of the huge issues, not only with communication between all the different units responding to the towers burning down and everything else, but the communication towers on top of the twin towers were sending out radio. Is where because it's they were the two tallest buildings in New York, where sending radio is where they had their repeaters. So they were then unable to communicate with each other. And that's where we see all the 800 megahertz radios. I think AMR finally got some, but we had the county, or I don't know, Mediquest, we always call them the county radios, but the fluorescent green radios that are all 800 megahertz. All this came from like post 9/11 ICS type stuff of trying to find different ways that we can maintain communication on these big incidents. And almost every incident, I think I brought this up multiple times throughout class, anytime there's a failure point, it's almost always pointed at or to communication in some way. And it's not necessarily always the technical side of things, of the radio channels, the radio waves, people on them, all that. But usually it's a communication failure that leads to some of these common problems at MCS. And you're going to see almost all these have something to do with communication, at least in one way or another. So unable to provide widespread notification of the event to other people that are around there, to other units. Once again, October 1st, the special event crews at the event didn't notify FAO that there was an event going on. And it took a fire engine going by, noticing the event, and they're like, oh, there's something going on here. We need to go ahead and start getting units rolling. So that's kind of that widespread notification. If for all of you guys who remember decently well, we're in town or whatnot, or I was outside of town at the time. I was on a flight, and I was down in Yuma for that time, and just getting all these texts from everyone. And you see all these reports of, oh, there's gunshot, there's a shooter, they're shooting in every casino. It's either misinformation, wrong information, anything else. And it was just very interesting hearing all this stuff happening live. Some other things like common problem at mass casualty incidents. Better to provide rapid initial stabilization of all patients. We know trauma is very important to get all of to try and treat life threats as soon as possible, get those fixed, because you can't live with a tension pneumo very long, or extremity hemorrhagic bleeding. You will bleed out. Any type of hemorrhagic bleeding, but extremities ones that we can try and prevent mainly, with the exception of junctional and other things that we talked about. Okay, carrying on. Failure to move, collect, organize patients quickly in a treatment area. The disorganization. Sometimes some ambulance will sit there in the staging area, and many times people start jumping fences and running across a runway, or transporting themselves, which we saw a lot of time. But then they transport themselves to any hospital, and you get places like Desert Springs just getting overrun with trauma patients, and they don't deal with one trauma patient well, much less hundreds. So that's where all of a sudden a strike team of ambulance, of 10, 11 ambulances, I believe, got sent there to help with the triage situation in front of Desert Springs. And then failure to provide proper triage, recognizing which patients are sick, which patients are not, which patients can be treated that need to be treated right this instant, or they will become a black tagged patient, or hey, this patient can take a little bit longer, and this one is hey priority, and moving on, or putting too many resources towards black tagged patients, which patients that don't have a chance to really survive and thrive after, or survive the incident. Some of the comments, provision of overly time-consuming care. You're trying to provide that care to that patient. You're running a trauma code on a patient when you have 8 other reds, and you're putting a ton of resources trying to save one trauma patient where there's not a ton we can do. You might maybe save that patient, but by doing that, you now put at risk of the lives of so many others. Premature transport of patients. If all of a sudden you start sending out a bunch of yellows and then the reds are just getting extricated or moved from a scene, and then you transport those yellows out there, and now you have no ability to transport those red patients who need to get to the trauma center immediately and get blood or whatever else, emergency surgery. And so all of a sudden you transported them too quickly without and kind of out of order. Improper use of personnel in the field can be obviously any type of thing that can kind of happen. Failure to communicate with local medical facilities regarding patient flow and medical facility capacity. This is huge. There's a number of different ways that they can try and track this. We see all those trackers in the hospitals, and that are not always used the most. But we can see those, right? And it's also the importance of, just because a patient might go, I want to go to Sunrise. Well, we're not going to go to Sunrise. Sunrise is full. We're going to go here in a MCI. A lot of this care now gets pushed out of the way. Or what normally we go, you want to go to Sunrise, we're going to take you. Like, nope, sorry, this time we need to take you to UMC, maybe Sienna, just because they've sent 5 reds to UMC, last 10 reds to Sunrise. They don't have the capacity to care for this patient anymore, and a level 3 or even a non-trauma center that is capable can now handle this patient and stabilize them good enough until we can figure out afterwards and send them to a better location. But this is why the staging manager could possibly, or the transport or IC or whoever's kind of running has that span of control and the ability and who's telling you where you need to go, you need to follow that, because that also helps them track where that person's going and how many people are going to each hospital. It's pretty important. However, many of these MCIs, they lose that. And then communicating with the hospitals. Hey, Sunrise, you have many times there's that initial communication with the hospitals. Hey, we have an MCI coming in. We're going to go ahead and try and split the patients between Sunrise and UMC. Let you guys know, Sunrise, you guys are most likely going to have 4 patients coming in pretty quickly, so then they can activate and call in all the extra on-call people they need to, get trauma surgeons there, get blood out of the blood banks, all these separate things that we need to let them know. And then they can go, hey, we don't have that ability right now. Our CT went down or whatever else, right? There's a number of things that they need to be able to communicate back, and then we need to make adjustments off our transport. So if you get told, go to this hospital, don't go, oh, the patients they're not saying, I'm not going to listen to what they told me. You need to try and go, unless some really, really bizarre things, you need to go to where they told you to go. There's a reason for that, and send that patient there. In an MCI, all of a sudden, trauma triage criteria kind of goes out the window in a sense. When you talk to the transport leader, and you're like, hey, we want to take this patient there, they are trying to keep track of how many patients of what criticality, and yes, they know it's a trauma patient, but hey, we're going to send this person to Southern Hills, even though we know it's not a trauma center, but they're overfilled. We're going to send them there. You have this patient. I understand it's a trauma patient, but we're going to go to the next one. So lack of proper pre-planning and lack of adequate training for all personnel. It's why ongoing ICS training is important, and triage training is important in MCI. Some things we can't plan for. Someone shooting out of a hotel at a large group of people. We're not expecting that. 9/11, we're not expecting people to crash multiple planes in there. So we're going to talk about a couple different triage systems. SALT triage is used. I am not as familiar with it. I'm aware. I will go through this. I don't have as much practical experience with this compared to I have the SMART triage system. Depending, you just have to. I believe we have mostly the SMART triage system within this Sonora Health District. However, you can go places where they do have the SALT. And so I'm just going to introduce you because you might see this someplace somewhere else, and you never know if they're going to. But SALT is an acronym. Comes into SALT begins with the global sorting of patients, prioritizing them from individual assessments. This sorting process results in a patient prioritization. Priority 3 can walk, priority 2 can wave or makes purposeful movement, priority 1 does not move or has obvious life threat. You're going to notice it's very similar to SMART, kind of similar thing. We're going to talk. Step 2, triage. Rapid life-saving interventions. Control major hemorrhage through use of direct pressure provided by the patient, tourniquets, other devices. Open airway through positioning of BLS. No tubing patients. Supraglottics usually can be appropriate, at least to try. Don't waste devices if you have a limited amount and on a patient that is going to be tagged black. If it's a child, give a couple rescue breaths. We know breathing can be very critical in a patient. They might have got hit in the head. Their airway might have been kind of closed down, their head forward, and so it's a little bit closed off, whether it be tongue and or just positioning. So reposition the airway. Give 2 breaths to see if we kind of jumpstart them. If that doesn't work, and we're going to jumpstart in a minute. And then indicated, we providing chest decompression, not chest compressions, right? DART patients. This is why in MCIs, if you look at a number of the different instances, I know City has a MCI bag that they'll pull out, and they have a ton of tourniquets and other things. The Metro also has their tactical vehicle. It's a standard Explorer one, but it has a bunch of extra equipment in there to include a huge bag of tourniquets that they'll bring, and they'll drop at an incident like at MCI. And then administering auto-injector antidotes. When we talk about Mark 1 kits with the atropine and 2-PAM, and those are just auto-injectors where you hit yourself in the legs. We had these at the embassy in Iraq in Baghdad, and they were up all over the walls, and we had quite a few more of those for incidents like this. So continue on. Those are just a couple of ones. If we don't have an antidote, just go with it. Life-saving interventions. All life-saving interventions performed rapidly and only with responders. Scope of practice. Paramedics should not step to fetch additional equipment or supplies. You're going through. If you have tourniquets, you're throwing it on. If you have chest starts, you're going through. If you have a partner that's not doing anything and you just use the last chest start, maybe send them back to the ambulance to grab more chest starts, and you're going to continue to move on. You're trying to do the most good for the most amount of people. If you spend too much time with one person, you have the opportunity, and whether they can be saved or not, you are now possibly delaying care to further on patients. Your job is treatment, only the immediate life threats, and moving on. Treatment will deal with the further on trying to keep a red and trying to keep a yellow from moving to a red and a red to a black. that's kind of what we're doing here. Treatment and or transport. Dead, a black triage tape or tag. If it's an adult, is the patient breathing after opening the airway? If it's a child, is the patient breathing after airway and giving 2 breaths? Nope. Black tagged and move to the morgue when we get an opportunity. Continue with treatment transport. Immediate, reds. Does patient follow commands or make purposeful movement? Does patient have a peripheral pulse? Is the patient not in respiratory distress? Is hemorrhage controlled? Expectant, gray, white, blue, depending on tag system, is no. And also, this is also kind of considered black tagged. They might have changed some of this due to racial connotations, but many times it's still black tag. Just know what triage system you're using locally and kind of go that. Like I said, typically we're using the smart system and the smart triage tag system. It's almost the exact same. And we'll talk about that next right after here. If they are unlikely to survive a given available resource, patient is tagged expectant, even if they have agonal breaths and you feel like you could save them if you had an extra partner. No, we need to do the most good for the most amount of people. Yellow triage, does the patient have peripheral pulses? Are they non-respiratory distress? Is hemorrhage controlled? Do they follow command, make purposeful movements? Yes. If they're minimal, if they're walking wounded, they should be greened. Using tags, after they receive care, they get tags. Depending on what type of tags, we'll look at some in class. All right. And we're going to go over exercises in class 2. So the assessment is used to classify patient status as minor, delayed, immediate, or dead. Start triage system allows rescuers to quickly identify greatest risk of early death and try and prevent that. So start triage is what I have used the most and what I've trained on the most. And so one easy thing, and I believe that is what we are currently using within Southern Nevada Health District. If it changed between here and the last class, I'm sorry. Go ahead and update me when this starts. That's why I do talk about both, but these are the 2 nationwide ones. Start tends to be used more, at least in my experience. Things change. So 3-2 can do criteria. So basically this is 30 breaths or less, if they're breathing less than 30 respirations a minute, their capillary refill is less than 2 seconds, and they're following commands, they tend to be yellow. If they can walk, they're green. So we'll kind of talk about some of these, and the 32 can do. So many types of tags, tabs, tapes, ribbons, labels are used to indicate a patient's triage category, triage tagging system. There's a number of pre-made, of very fancy ones. There's rolls of kind of that tape where you can kind of tie a tag onto them real quick and move on to really fancy barcode scanning systems that help track patients throughout. So the Met tag and the smart tag system, there are a couple different very commonly used ones. Once again, we're going to be going over this in class, and I'll show you guys some examples. Smart tag system uses 4-color triage coding tags that have military barcodes for tracking patients. You have priority red, immediate treatment, yellow, urgent, green, delayed, black cards, death. Tracking system for patient tracking log is similar to the shipping manifest and must have the following information: patient identification, transporting unit, patient priority, medical facility, destination. That's why if you mark on your tag that you are going to, or that they have assigned you to go to Sunrise, you should be. There's always really, really random circumstances that really might dictate this, but in all 99.9% of the time, you should be going to wherever that says, because that allows us to track where the patients go and allow us to make sure that we're not overloading one hospital system too much. We saw this as a huge issue in October 1st. Patient transport. The patients are transport depends on the triage, priority, and situation. Ambulances typically use buses, maybe use a large number of stable patients. We talked about this. The AMR has that big bus. Sometimes you use school buses, city buses, whatever else. Air ambulance is usually reserved for transport of patients in critical condition. We see this used more on big MVCs and out on Highway 93, different areas. And I've been responding on both sides of calling in multiple air units as well as being responded to. Many times the helicopters will orbit. However, depending on a number of situations, their fuel load, heat, other things like that, they might only be able to orbit for a certain amount of time before landing. So this is where like your landing zone coordinator really needs to be able to try and land as many helicopters as they can safely. Many times the pilots are talking amongst themselves. However, it's good to try and coordinate if we can. The pilots say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and coordinate. This unit's coming down next due to fuel status. They are talking air to air to each other. Usually, so because they're making sure that they don't cause an incident by running into each other or whatever else, and they're usually communicating fuel status and other things. One base might be from right around the corner. One might have lower amounts of fuel due to whatever reason, what's helicopter type, distance traveled, where base location's at when they last refueled, a number of things, and they might prioritize with themselves who's landing first and who's not. I wouldn't worry too much on that side. Many times the pilots, they don't want to hear what we have to say as far from the ground side, other than where to land and where to go, because they are very good at communicating with each other. Pilots are some of the best people on the radio as far as communication goes. They are very good at not stepping on each other. If you want to hear, we can listen to some radio channels sometime, and they are just locked on. They do some of the best radio communication I've seen. And then at the end, we talk about critical incident stress management. Just a quick review for the start, triage, and jump start, which is for the peds. We'll go over this more in class with the individual tags, and we'll have some practical application, and your guys' subgroup. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that. Critical incident stress is a potential hazard for rescue personnel. Support services should be able to help manage the stress after a traumatic event. We saw this hugely after October 1st, but many times using this, it should be activated no matter what after these huge major incidents, particularly if there's a lot of patients on the MCI side and dealing with that. So should be a little bit there. All right, we're going to talk about leadership in EMS real quick for the last 4 or so slides, and some different areas that you can look at as far as leadership in EMS goes. So that is it for the MCI lecture. This is going to be that follow-on lecture on pre-hospital jobs. Basically, from some national standards, there's basically 3 levels of EMS, of leadership within EMS. I'm separating this from the fire side. The fire side has its own leadership side. Once again, it's not a Fire 1 and 2 class. We do incorporate some of the rescue stuff and trying as much as we can with there. But as a pure EMS side, we're going to go ahead and break this down as supervising into the 3 separate ones. Our supervising EMS officers, the managing EMS officers, and the executive EMS officers. These are the 3 major recognized groups. They can be separated into different types depending on what areas you're working with. And here, and particularly with AMR, the EMS side is usually supervisor managers and whatever else GMs and above tend to be. Out in Arizona, particularly with Guardian Ground, they had captains, which are on-duty soups, in a ambulance. Then you had your BCs, which responded in a BC type unit, and then their chiefs. And so they were based much more off of a fire model. And you'll see a number of different formats. I'm not going to go necessarily over all of them. And then you have the subcategories, even within a system of EMS officers from a fire side, which EMS 1, things like that. Field supervisor, which is what we talk about for our standard field soups from the private side, or EMS lieutenant in some ones. And we see EMS lieutenant types and fire lieutenants seen a little bit more back east, but you see them everywhere. Just depends on where you're at and what you're doing and what agencies you're going. Typically, they respond. So we talk about the supervising EMS. Typically, they're responsible for daily schedule assignment of personnel units, ensuring adequate resource and responses to significant events, and serving as initial incident commander for some smaller emergencies. Our BCs from the ambulance side, not from the fire side, and flag staff would respond out. There's a lot of areas that their certificate of necessity, so the area that they were supposed to respond to incidents, didn't necessarily have a fire unit responding with them, so they actually had extrication unit, and we all had turnouts as part of that hospital-based EMS system. Here, a little bit different. But as Mike Gannon can kind of say, he's shown up on scene and helped, and many times on the time locally when they get moved to medical group, supervised leader, depending on what the situation is, or put in charge of certain medical areas, and they're there to help coordinate some of that. They also work within daily operations of the field and station to ensure daily operations are running smoothly, provide primary support to staff for field operations. See, depending on the area, the company, the organization, agency, they all have a little bit somewhat different small responsibilities, but it's basically the field soup, the one who's still in the field doing things. All right, managing officers are the middle managers, often referred to them as EMS coordinators, operations managers, EMS captain, division chief. The managing EMS officer is responsible for managing major components of EMS organization, serves as divisional and unit leads, acts as staff specialist responsible for administration clinical functions within EMS. These guys are a bit more desk-bound. They typically have a lot of recent field experience and sometimes still do some field stuff. They will go out and help bigger incidents. They do have usually a ton of experience, and they can help on the bigger incidents. So the managing EMS officers typically respond to major incidents involving mass casualties and multi-agencies operations, where they can really fit into the higher levels of medical EMS branch supervisors, some of that higher end, particularly on the ones that usually takes them a little bit longer to get those incidents, and then they fill in and help there. Sometimes act as liaison and fill in whatever spots that are kind of needed, and calling up reserves, doing different things like that. So managing EMS officer, highly special tasks is developing, managing educational programs, developing and implementing deployment plans and system status management, coming up with overall long-term plans, not just the staffing operations of the day and incident response, but the where posting plans, all the dings, where new stations sometimes go. Stations are a little bit more because some of the stations have a higher level, like chief-esque level, or general, almost executive level on here. So last one, executive EMS officers are the senior management team members, often introduced for them as deputy chief, director, chief of department. Executive EMS officers is responsible for providing general management and top level leadership to an EMS organization. They report to and manage board of directors in private and not-for-profit EMS sectors, so the department heads and governmental EMS agencies. In addition to executive level leadership, managerial and administrative duties, this also typically responds to major incident, mass casualty, and multi-agencies, operates in those instances as part of a multi-agency unified command. At this point, from those very, very high levels, that person is going there and operating in the chief in the tent or wherever else they're at, linking up with the IC, the initial incident, and as that becomes a unified command, you have police, you have EMS, and you have fire. They are operating at that level and coordinating there. Their primary role is to ensure overall operation performance and the organization meets goals and expectations. They provide support to other EMS officers and work not only to ensure today's operations to meet expectations, but also prepare changes and to meet expectations for agencies in the future. So this is directly off one of the national standards, just kind of giving you guys an idea of what overall. Obviously, there's a little bit of sometimes there's a middle ground, sometimes a little bit gray area between certain couple levels, depending on how that organization's kind of set up. Leadership, also education, numerous ways to gain additional education, and how to become leadership. And we're not, this you can almost count because educators are considered part of somewhat of a leadership position, even though they don't necessarily have direct underlings besides the students, possibly themselves. But not fully talking about that right here, but we can kind of brief over that. And if you guys have any questions about trying to get into education, you guys get your 3 years of experience and you have your associates, so you're good to go ahead and start being an educator, especially for us. Also, that being said, online pro, they help. There's different ways to get different parts. It definitely helps to have advanced degrees. Depending on where you're at, sometimes an associate's all that needed. A bachelor can be helpful. Masters and certain places, particularly when you look at emergency management response. When you start getting to the master level, you now get you start at the bachelor's level where the feds really start wanting you, such as FEMA, some of the other federal agencies that allow you to start acting that emergency response, and you're starting moving on that higher level. The master levels where you really start being able to advance even in those higher level ones. There's a lot of extra very specialty type courses that help you advance, and there's some interesting pathways. So there's a few programs throughout the United States, such as the University of Arizona, which is a pre-med based program. It's one I'm in, and Mr. Schaefer is. There's emergency management degrees, a little much more common. There's not very many paramedic or emergency services based ones necessarily. There's becoming more and more as education continues to be hopefully prioritized in this. And you guys already, because you're in this program, are part of an associates based program, and you guys are already somewhat fast tracked to leadership. We have our former students in many places of leadership within this valley already. The fire-based system has a little bit more longer track record in there, and there's a little bit separate. But as far as EMS goes, currently because there's not a ton of degreed people and a lot of higher level places want you to have that at least an associates to start picking up some of those. It's not a requirement here. Some agencies start having that as a requirement, but it does make you much more marketable there. But that emergency management degrees, another one is Arizona State University. They offer one. Many colleges offer emergency management from hybrid to in person. And many degrees outside, besides maybe a business degree, I don't know, right, can be useful. And then there's education-based degrees like Miss Needfield has, and that help you more on the education side, but still good in leadership. So let's talk about some more of that. Even communications degrees, things like that can be very useful. Pay ranges, it's all over the place, guys, depending on what position, who you're working with, what you're doing. Average EMT paramedic supervisor in the United States, 71,000. Typical range falls between 62 and 84, and that's without additional advanced certs, both leadership and or like critical care. You start adding a supervisor in critical care for like even AMR, GMR, you're getting close to 6 figures working for a private ambulance. So there is ways to make a ton of money just working on an ambulance, even in a frontline supervisor position and or critical care type position. All right, that's it, guys. If you have any further questions, we'll talk about more in class. You guys have a great day.